Hi, what you're about to see is a recorded conversation I had with Alan Parrish yesterday, one of our elders here at St. Joseph Church of Christ. Unfortunately, near the end of the conversation, at some point, the video stopped recording, and at the same time that the video stopped recording, I got a message from Bride that she needed to be taken to the hospital. And she's okay. I had a concern about a potential blood clot after having surgery last week. She's fine, but as a result of all of that, it meant that Alan and I did not get to complete our conversation. So what you're about to see is only half of the conversation. Hopefully at some point soon we can get Alan back in here. We can continue the conversation because I think it's an important one to have to discuss faith and politics and to not be afraid of those topics, but to understand how our faith should uphold our politics, not necessarily the other way around. Faith first, leading to how we look to the government. So I hope you enjoy the conversation, what parts of it that we were able to salvage and make available to you. And I look forward to having Alan back in here so we can continue the conversation at a later date. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to our conversations. I like doing these. So I'm sitting here with one of our elders, Alan Parrish, who has agreed to come in today specifically to talk about faith and politics, which is something that's a very dear topic to your heart, I believe. So
yeah, definitely one of those topics they tell us not to talk about, but I usually dive right into it. So if you ever around me, we'll probably go down that
Which
road.
you should dive right into it, because the reality is they say not to talk about it because they don't want you to have arguments with each other. But those are two of the most important topics. So if we as Christians refuse to ever engage with them, what are we doing? Why is it valuable to us? So
yeah, to me the two topics really go hand in hand. I mean, they're really about, to me, a way to talk to somebody about just what they believe in general.
Yeah.
Religion is one, obviously your faith side of things, but to me the politics side is one, is really your beliefs in action. So to me, you can always talk about the weather, the kids, and all that stuff, but if you really want to get to know somebody, you got to understand what they themselves believe as truth.
Yeah, and be willing to listen.
And that's for us as Christians. We want to share the love and truth of Jesus with others because
That's right.
It brings us joy. So we want to share that joy with others.
So that said, this is a conversation. You and I have distinct political beliefs. Don't necessarily agree with everything. At least I don't think so. I think we're pretty much aligned with each other. But our political beliefs don't necessarily reflect every single person here at the church either. However, hopefully our religious beliefs do, that we believe that Jesus Christ is the Son of God, that he died on the cross for our sins, that he rose again so we can have eternal life, and that has to be the foundation for everything else that we believe, whether it goes into the realm of politics or family or work or anything else. So that's kind of the basis that we're going to be talking about today, is that the foundation is faith. How does that influence then how we pursue other areas? Yeah. Yep. So, Alan, why don't you share a little bit about yourself and why is this so important to you?
To me, just, I was in the service, just did 3 years with the Army, but, to me, the way our nation was founded, really, just being that novice historian and really seeing God bless us as a nation to give us freedoms no one prior to our founding ever got to experience. When you read through history, tyranny was the norm. Mm-hmm. And freedom was the rare thing that ever happened. And so, for us as Americans, I think we sometimes forget how blessed we truly are, not just in the here and now, but really for the last 200 years, when our nation was founded, and even before that too, just this new continent that was formed, really a clean slate. A lot of the old history didn't exist. And so we were able to really write our own. And I think God really was involved in that as a Christian and just as a person who studies history, and just seeing how the coincidence is just line up to see the hand of God in action.
Yeah, I think it's easy to take what we have for granted. It's not unlike the Israelites being, set free from Egypt, and yet even in the midst of everything that God was doing for them, leading them to the promised land, they still complained.
Oh,
And
absolutely.
they were begging to go back to Egypt because it's what they knew, it's what they wanted. And I think sometimes we get to be the same way, where we almost look for the earthly king to lead us again.
Absolutely. And this is to me just that fact of human nature that is true is, we are broken and fallen people, and we are always looking for somebody to give us the answers because our knowledge is very limited and what we can do. Our power is limited, so we're always looking for someone out there to save us from X, Y, and Z. You can name it, and so that's where, to me, the politics side along with our faith side come in there because, what happens when you give, a sinner more power? The absolute power corrupts absolutely type of deal. Or, our founders, if men were angels, we wouldn't need government. But since they're not, we have to have it. So we gotta strike that balance between the two. Otherwise, when you tip the scales too far in either direction, usually things go badly.
Yeah, absolutely. So then how has your faith influenced your personal political beliefs?
And really, I use the Bible just as a gauge, right? Not every situation we come across politically is in the Bible. How do you fund roads? How do you fund, the X, Y, and Z? A lot of those things aren't in the Bible, but, to me, I always like to go back to the Ten Commandments. If the policy doesn't steal from anybody, or you're not trying to manipulate people, are you trying to preserve just kind of an even, impartial set of rules? That's kind of what I'm using to gauge, some of those beliefs. And
I think that's a great way to look at it, to really take it all back to the Ten Commandments. Absolutely. So this is and I see you came in with some books too, so we might need to get into those. So we're in the middle of or at least the start of an election year. It feels like a weird election year because you didn't have big primaries or any of that kind of
no.
This is a strange election year. So this kind of conversation, I think, is pertinent. It needs to happen so that people can make faith-based decisions on government. So then, that said, how would you personally then apply the Ten Commandments and that foundation then to how you look at even presidency, not necessarily any of the one of the two there, and we can talk about that if you want to, but look at the way the different offices are within the government, whether it's executive or legislative or judicial. How do you look at that?
Yeah, I mean, really, our founders were very brilliant, by recognizing that giving one person too much power is not a good thing. Obviously, they rebelled against a king, and so they set up the three branches of government, the executive branch, legislative, and judiciary as checks and balances. And to me, those are the things that we have to recognize exist in our system. So, if we're voting, we need to be able to recognize and know what each kind of those leaders down the whole entire list, from our school board people we elect all the way to the president. We got to be a little bit more knowledgeable on those people, because people are policy. And so you need to have people in some way in there that you can trust to make wise decisions, because we have a representative form of government. And to me, that's the nice thing about our system is, it's not someone seizing power. It's, we elect them. But oftentimes those people reflect our culture. And so, no matter what, we're electing a sinner in there, and they're never going to make all the choices, we would, but sometimes they either make the best choices they could with the knowledge that they know, or if they're relying on, really their truths that they believe in. And that's to me where, especially as you move up the chain of hierarchy, depending on how much power they have, the influence of one person can really have a trickle down effect on, our lives, like taxes for one example. If you tax policies that you want, if you want to keep more of your own money is one way of, or they can take it from another. And to me, that goes in the 10 Commandments of, thou shalt not steal or covet.
Taxation is theft.
At some point it is.
At some point it is.
Yeah.
Yes.
But we need obviously to fund certain things to ensure our national sovereignty and peace and tranquility. So there's a balance in there. And the next question is what is that balance?
That's a difficult balance. And I think there are a lot of different people that have different perspectives too, that believe. I think that's one of the main differences that we end up getting with the different political sides on taxation, is that there are some that believe that government exists in order to meet the needs of all the people, whereas the other side is that government exists in order to protect all the people, and those are they seem like they're almost diametrically opposed to one another, because you can't take all the money and meet all the needs and still protect at the same time.
Right. And this is to me where we have to understand a little bit too biblically, what are the responsibilities of each kind of role? For us as individuals, for us as, a state or nation, God says revenge is his, and he gives the authority to enact judgments to our state governments, because quite honestly, it turns into a tit for tat, eye for an eye kind of thing if we ourselves as humans were to take that responsibility on. And so to me, in some ways, government's in there to guard us from making really bad decisions, because people can make bad decisions.
They can. But if you take that a little step further, oftentimes the governments will come in and say that you're making bad decisions so that they can have more power over you and become dictatorships, which I'm afraid sometimes I feel like that's what it kind of becomes.
Yes, yeah.
So I have one of the questions I wanted to ask you about this one specifically. How do you balance the concept of individual liberty, which is important to me because I'm more on that libertarian, like Republican libertarian cusp there. How do you balance the concept of individual liberty with the need for moral standards and social order in policymaking?
Yeah, so to me, it gets very hard, right? Because to me, we have to have as a certain culture to have certain norms of decency and those types of things that to me sometimes get lost, and those influences that impact these things, right? Because quite honestly, you can't legislate morality,
right?
You have to ingrain that in yourself, and this is to me where as parents, and to me that first order of government, which is the family, is where a lot of that stuff is taught. And to me, being able to ensure those rights within the parents, and in some level the extended family too, can teach those concepts of morality. But just looking at history, people are going to do what they want to do. But how do we make sure that, the impacts that one individual, the bad choices that they make do not, to me, cascade into other people? Drinking and driving is one. It's like, it makes perfect sense, right?
Right.
We don't want you to get in a car and potentially harm somebody when the easy thing to do is just get a ride home.
Right. I feel the same way about, even seatbelts though. Is that really something that needs to be legislated when that's a personal, you're only harming yourself? It's a stupid thing, but I think with the concept though of morality and social programs and all of that, at some point we have to have the conversation of where does the morality come from? Because without God, the concept is that morality it's social morality. It's for socially within the group that you're within. what leads to their betterment ultimately.
Yeah.
Right. Which means that in say Nazi Germany, the Holocaust, if it was social morality, was incredibly moral for Nazi Germany.
Right.
Right. And there would have been nothing wrong with that for those that don't believe that morality comes from God, but comes from society. And so I think when we have those conversations, we have to understand there are many people who believe that society determines morality, in which case that's how they're going to just look at policymaking, versus what we as God followers, as Christians believe, that we believe that God is absolute truth, that Jesus is truth, and that he's the one that dictates morality. So how would you personally respond to anybody that does not believe that God sets morality, but that society does?
Well, and this is to me where, well, how has that panned out in world history? When you don't view other humans as having that divine spark created in the image of God, it allows you to treat other humans as
However you want.
However you want. If you feel like you're the most superior person, then everybody else is subjective to you. That's kind of what the old monarchies thought. The old gods, the pharaohs and the kings were divine. And the stuff that happened, like you said, in Nazi Germany. That wasn't, even though Christianity was tied into the government itself
Was not a Christian government.
Was not a Christian. It was a socialistic government,
Right.
which by definition, socialism is atheistic, because there is no other power than the state.
That's right.
And that's, to me, where when we start to discuss, to me, the broader worldviews in them in action, this is to me where, how do we as Christians engage with a fallen world and to me hold to the principles of truth and, to me, general goodness. It's do unto others as you would have them do unto you, right? I think one of the coolest things about being in our town is, hey, I found, you see someone pop up on the community page. Hey, I found a wallet at this intersection. Anybody missing it?
Yes.
And someone's like, if that was some other town where, some of these smaller towns have a little bit more community, I would say, engagement there than others, like, good luck finding that wallet,
Right.
And that's, to me, and that's, I think, even some cultures like Japanese culture. One, like, we've had missionaries come here and they say you could leave your laptop on a table in the middle of a coffee shop, your bag, everything, go to the bathroom and come back, and it'll still be there. I bet you couldn't do that now, not here, So to me, that's where it gets kind of interesting on some of these conversations, because there can be people who aren't Christian who are still good people. But how do we reach them? And that's, to me, where, as a Christian, we should be the leaders in integrity.
Right.
We shouldn't check our Christian faith at the doors when we leave the church. We should be examples of what, to me, Christianity should embody, and we should be living those principles out and happy to share them with others. And, people might look at you funny at times because you're not doing what the world is doing, but quite honestly, to me, if Hollywood's the pinnacle of worldliness, no, thank you. I mean, I enjoy a good movie from time to time, but you look at some of the lives there, and it's just like,
Yeah.
nah, maybe not so much.
Yeah. Pretty disconnected from reality.
Right.
Yeah. Just threw me for a loop. I wasn't expecting to talk about Hollywood today. I was thinking more like Washington and or Chicago in our area and everything. So yeah, I agree with you. I think that when we go out, we ought to be willing to say, when somebody does good, or if they do evil, to be willing to say, this is why this is good, this is why this is evil, and how those things point to the reality of, and the necessity of God and absolute truth. And instead we I think sometimes we hang our head and ignore it and don't speak out often enough. Because you're right. Somebody that believes in God, they still can do good things because morality is written on their hearts. It's not
Right.
It's not limited to just Christians to be
Right.
have the capacity for good. The difference that we understand where good actually comes from.
Right.
Right. You mentioned family a bit ago. So in our society, the idea of the traditional family has taken a massive hit. Right. I mean, you can see that through Hollywood. You can see that in government and the policymaking. You can certainly see that here in Illinois with some of the policymaking.
Right.
So how do you then uphold traditional family values? Not even necessarily traditional, but biblical family values in the midst of everything else.
I mean, it's a lot of work. I mean, and that's the thing that trying to instill, like as Proverbs says, raise up the child in the way of the Lord. So if they do depart from it, they'll come back, right? To paraphrase it. At some point, I think, everybody as a child is somewhat rebellious because, they want to, own up to their own lives to some point, right?
Yeah.
And that's to me where, just even with our own kids, it's like, I want to share all my wisdom I have for, with you, but are you willing to listen to me? And it gets hard,
Right.
As a parent, but there are certain things where, like, the TV shows that we watch, are they promoting good values or bad values? Bad company corrupts good morals, those types of things. So it's just, how do we let kids kind of slowly wade out into the world rather than just push them out into the deep end, and that's to me where, we have to be very cognizant of what is going on. So, these stuff, because messages to kids come in very, very subtly. I mean, you can watch all these different cartoons and stuff like that. There's a lot of adult humor in some of those cartoons, so you can enjoy it, but it's completely over the head of kids. But,
and that doesn't necessarily mean inappropriate humor either.
No.
Yeah.
One favorite one of mine that I like was, the Boss Baby. I mean, there's a lot of business
I've
humor.
never actually watched Boss Baby.
It's funny.
Is it?
Yeah, there's so much work, jokes in there. It's funny. So it's a good one.
Okay, maybe I'll suck it up and watch that one sometime. But yeah, there are a lot of movies that are like that. That
Right.
It doesn't necessarily mean inappropriate. It just means it's beyond a child's capability to understand because they don't have the life experience
Correct.
to engage with it. I think one of the biggest challenges that I have is not raising my kids in a bubble. I don't want them to be raised in a bubble out of fear and concern that they're only going to have my perspective, and then when they're older, they're going to rebel against that, right? And so how do I then not just throw them into it, like you said, let them wade into the waters a little bit, not just throw them into it, but at least be willing to say, this is what's out there. This is how you respond to it. Knowing that every time I have those conversations, I'm taking away a little bit of their innocence.
Yeah.
Right. I don't like that feeling.
No. And I think the first thing we got to recognize as parents is, our kids have unique skills and gifts that, we ourselves do not have necessarily, but how do we bring those out? Because naturally we're going to want to try to teach and share the things that, we enjoy doing, but they may not enjoy doing those things. So you're kind of force feeding some stuff, that they don't want to do, and then it creates conflict. When in reality, you just need to find the things that you both really enjoy together, and do those together.
Yeah.
And then that way, they could just see you, parent in a way that allows them to grow.
Right. Yeah, I agree with that. I was actually having a conversation like this yesterday with one of my kids. It was either my oldest or my daughter. I think it was my daughter, and I was trying to read a book called the Return of the God Hypothesis by Stephen Meyer, which is a response to Dawkins' The God Delusion and all that kind of stuff. And I was telling her, and said this to all three of them, that someday I want them to read those books. All right. It's important for them to be able to critically think. It's important then if I want them to believe in God and follow Jesus Christ, they also need to know what the alternative is and why it makes more sense to follow God and to believe that God exists. They need to know all of that. And that means I have to also be willing to introduce them to atheistic concepts and agnostic concepts. And I can't just spoon feed them my faith, because eventually they have to come to that crossroads. And that's true whether it's faith or whether it's politics too. There's a chance that my kids might grow up someday and I not agree with them. I don't like that thought.
Yeah.
Yeah. So how do you walk that out? Politics. How do you walk that out with your kids?
Actually, something I've been doing with my son lately is going and hearing other people's stories.
Yeah.
Because I can try to share my life experience with them, but it doesn't always carry the weight that someone else's story would have. And so whenever because I haven't lived it, right?
Yeah.
I just know theoretically that X, Y, and Z is bad, right?
Yeah.
Because I've never gone down that road. So hearing someone else's testimony, to me, carries some more weight. And I think that's where, even from that faith side of things, all of us have different paths and journeys we're on with God. And sometimes those of us who grew up in the church 100%, from the kids, from we were toddlers to now, like, we can't always relate with other people who have very dissimilar testimonies. So to me, with the kids is helping them maybe find some other kind of, I wouldn't necessarily say mentors, but someone that might have a way to share some truth that I've been sharing with them, because it's just from another source. It's kind of the if something gets accurate, it hits that target over and over again. So if we can show we're on target, and it's just not me hitting it, because you can always be off target and hitting the target over somewhere else.
Yeah.
So to me, having someone else kind of just re-engaging and reinforcing some of those same principles, and I think that's where the church really comes in handy. If we're all kind of reading from the same book, if you will,
which we should be,
we're all going to be hitting that same target. We're all going to want to be having people focus on Jesus and understanding what he wants for each of us. Because God is gracious and merciful and patient and all these things, and some of us, we beat our heads against the wall, just because we're stubborn. Whereas other people, they're like, I'll just listen to you and take the easy road,
Right.
So it's just, how do we find those ways to, in some ways, help clear a path, but you can't remove all the obstacles, because then they don't really grow either. So there's got to be some level of, to me, them failing and getting them back up and dusting themselves off. But hopefully the things that they're failing at are the easy ones, and not some of the really things that can have really dire consequences too.
Right. I've been thinking about that quite a bit lately. In fact, I almost wrote it into last Sunday's sermon, but it was a family Sunday and my sermon was getting a little bit long, so I had to cut about half of what I wanted to say out. But the concept of suffering, right? Because I was speaking on passion, and that the root for passion is to suffer, right? And so along those lines, not all suffering is evil. There are trials that we go through. There are challenges we face. The Scripture tells us that we have to endure, to persevere. All of those things imply difficulty, that there's going to be something. So not all suffering is evil in this world, in any more than all pleasure is good. There is a lot of pleasure in this world that actually leads and produces evil. And I think that's one of the differences that we need to look at when it comes to the world our kids are growing up in, the world is trying to teach them and try to encourage policymaking that lifts up pleasure and the sense of pleasure as the greater good, and that the suffering that we go through, the challenges are therefore always bad. Or if I go through this, then God doesn't love me, or God's abandoned me. And all of those things are lies, right? So with that in mind, I have a question for you that I think is often very difficult. I think it's a difficult question for those of us that we love our kids and we want to see them raised in a world that doesn't necessarily have suffering.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, and I don't know if this answers some of that question too, because we kind of bringing it back to politics. This is that welfare state mentality, right?
Yeah.
To me, the welfare state tries to remove any sort of, suffering, if you will. And so, if you don't want to work, well, then we're just going to pay for it.
Give you a phone.
We're going to give you all these freebies and handouts. When in reality, to me, you're not helping people grow into their true potential, because, I don't mind having some level, maybe a safety net, right? To keep people from really hitting rock bottom, and then the struggle out gets a lot harder, right?
Well, Scripture says, in James, he says that a good and perfect religion in the sight of the Lord is to care for the widows and orphans in their distress and to not be conformed to the world. So if we're thinking about policy making with that concept, and I think the church should be the ones doing that. But if we then vote according to our faith and set policies according to our faith, then even the sense of welfare should not be done in a way where it's this ongoing giving, take, give. It should be, how do we care for people in their distress so that they are no longer in distress?
Yeah. And that's to me where, again, going back to, Scripture, that we've been doing some study in our Bible study class, about, money. And the Bible clearly says, if you're able-bodied, you work. Mm-hmm. And this is, to me, some of those policies when it comes to, look at welfare for, single parents and stuff like that. Like, some of those policies are, I think, have an intent to do good, but people naturally will abuse a system if they're allowed to. And I think this is where, kind of back to where you said that the church could be involved, and even I'd say our individual families they know us personally a lot more, so they know where the true need is, because sometimes you can be an enabler with some of these policies. And to me, then you, rather than trying to, have a safety net, you're really inflicting generational damage, because we tend to repeat the behavior that we see.
Yeah.
And that's, to me, where it gets very, very hard, because you don't always see the needs for people that are out there, right? I mean, we all live in our own little bubbles. Let's just be honest. We do. So until someone raises their hand and says, maybe I need some help, you're just going through life with your blinders on, right? So it gets, I think people are naturally good-hearted and want to help people. I think the vast majority of people are really that way. And so that's where, to me, I think they've circumvented, I would say, some of the more local ministry opportunities, or even to me, they don't even always have to be religious based, but people who just have a natural desire to help people recover, like the Habitat for Humanity is to me a great one. That organization. You gotta put some sweat equity in to get a home and those types of things, but that's to me where I think it can be done with a lot more efficiency if we take away some government out of it, and restore it back to more of a local community, county, maybe at the county level, than rather at the state or national level. Because to me, that just
the government levels have intended purposes that have been inflated, vastly inflated. There are a couple of things I want to touch on that you said. First of all, the idea of people being willing to say that I need help. takes a lot of humility. It takes a willingness to let people love you and to be willing to be vulnerable and say, hey, I'm not in a good place. And I think a lot of time pride gets in the way of that. People aren't willing to. They feel like they're made to feel like they're less than if they don't meet up with the Joneses or anything else. And that's that kind of thing. If we're going to change that, that's going to have to start within the church, where we stop looking at everybody and say, you have to look exactly like I look, and we direct people more to Christ and then to have a Christ-like attitude with other people. Another thing is that you said I want to touch on. I want to take it actually a step farther. You said that the welfare programs are often enabling. No, I agree with you. Absolutely. I think they're enabling. And this is my opinion. I actually think the way they're done is more than enabling. I think they're actually malicious. I think that a lot of our welfare programs, while there are good ones out there, are often very manipulative in order to control whole swaths of our population, to get them to where they are reliant on one group over another, to not rely on themselves so that they can be easily manipulated. And I think it speaks to those that try to manipulate and control by using welfare. It speaks to their heart of how they actually see people and the value of people. And frankly, it breaks my heart a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, to me, the borrower is slave to the lender, right?
Yeah.
And to me, when I look at that verse, when we look at who is supporting us as individuals, we often sometimes out of fear hit the easy button. And that's to me where this is where obviously faith comes into it, because at some level, I can take the easy job, or I can, the risk rewards that can kind of be there. But ultimately, hopefully, if I'm aligning my, passions and desires with what God is wanting me to bring out of them, to me, a lot of that fear goes away. But again, I think, this is that nature where, we all have that God-sized hole in our hearts, and we're trying to fill it. And some people are too scared sometimes to recognize the potential that God's really given them to do more. And that welfare state really relies on that fear component. Mm-hmm. And to me, anytime a people is in fear, it allows them to be herded like cattle.